recording just now. So I would like to give the warmest welcome to Nadia Soliman from Imperial College London, and she's going to talk about academic leadership to us today. So Nadia, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ella, and thank you all for tuning in today. So I am Nadia, and I'm a PhD candidate at Imperial College London. And as you may have been introduced, I do not have the most orthodox of backgrounds. And I've recently returned to academia, and my return, I would say, hasn't always been smooth sailing. And at times I've struggled with the culture. And so I've since started discussing my own military experiences and developing leadership development training in the hope of creating a more positive research culture which has people at the centre. So in my talk today, I'll share some of my experiences as a team leader before some of the theory in introducing the British Army's leadership model, which I think is a very simple yet effective tool, and actually is a useful way to start developing as a leader. I'm sharing my views and experiences just to generate discussion. I really don't claim to have all the answers to everything or every situation, but I really do feel fortunate that my experiences have enabled me to travel and meet so many different people and develop my leadership skills. And so I hope that you will find the themes today relevant to you. I think it would be remiss to not consider the situation that we are all currently in. We've certainly never used the word unprecedented more than we are now, and we are in very challenging times. And these are characterised by fear and uncertainty, unpredictability, the pressure of the changes, challenges. We've got a lot of concerns. That's all extremely exhausting. And these are all feelings that I certainly have felt before, but in a very different context. Things are going to keep changing, and what is also clear to us now is that we've got to adapt to what is a new normal and learn to live with the virus and the risks that are associated with it. And this requires leadership, and I really strongly believe that everyone has a role to play. And throughout this presentation, I'll use the phrase as a leader, and I use that in the most sort of general sense. We all have influence over others, and even if we're not currently in a formal leadership position, we do have informal leadership responsibilities. And so even if you're the most junior person in your team, to be a good team player, you can be looking out, speaking up, supporting the team in a variety of ways. So to begin, a little bit about me. I actually only have experience of two sectors, academia and the army. Academic organisations and the army, in my mind, are very similar. They're large organisations, historical institutions, made up of small units that perform very different roles, but actually come together to tackle some of the world's and society's greatest challenges. Both are organisations of their people doing very great things, and we work globally across cultures. So I did pharmacology at the University of Liverpool and graduated in 2007. At this time, I really debated what I wanted to do and what career I wanted to go into. And I debated staying in academia and doing a PhD or joining the army. And although I did deliberate for some time, in the end, I chose to join the army, and in part because it's something you can only do when you're young, but mainly because I was attracted to the challenge and the opportunity to travel and adventure and be given the responsibility to lead. So leadership. There isn't a single definition of leadership. It's extremely powerful, yet can seem intangible. But we can all recognise good and bad leaders, but encapsulating that into a single definition is not very easy. So the description that I have up on the slide is a transformational model of leadership. This is a theory of leadership where a leader works with the team to identify the changes, and they create the vision and the motivation and the inspiration to bring the team together, equip the team appropriately, and help them sort of execute the change or solve a specific problem. And it's important to differentiate leadership from management. They do go hand in hand, but management is very much the processes. You know, writing an appraisal report on time is managing, but leadership is the effort and the time that you spend doing it and the influence and impact that has on another person. So my leadership lessons started in training at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. I joined in 2009 with a large bunch of other young women. Being a year-long, very physical and mentally demanding course certainly taught me the value of great teamwork, and I gained the best of friends. The Sandhurst motto is "Serve to Lead," and this means that we're not motivated by self-interest, but in service to others. And it's something that you must really truly embody. You know, unless you give everything to your team, you will fail. So you put the safety, well-being, comfort above that of your own so that your team can be successful. And Sandhurst doesn't only aim to equip junior soldiers for combat situations, but a large part of our training is learning about the values and standards of leadership, what the leadership code is and what it means, and what it's required of an army officer, and how these responsibilities are never relinquished even when out of uniform. And so leadership is very much based on the values and identity of the led. So values provide the guiding principles for what we do, and how we manifest these values does much to define who we are and who we are as an institution and the institution within which we work. So when values are declared and closely followed, they really do provide a basis for trust and confidence. On the slide here, I have the values and standards of the British Army. And to us, courage, discipline, respect for others, selfless commitment, integrity, and loyalty are very much more than words on a page. They're exactly what we stand for and what sets us apart. And the leadership code are the behaviours, the types of behaviours that are required to really uphold those values. Some reflection throughout my career, I think the most important characteristics of a leader are these. So firstly, understanding yourself. I've learned how to lead myself. I know how to be motivated and determined. I challenge myself and I try not to give up. Through my time in the army, I have become very self-aware, which I believe is important for everyone, particularly if you are in a leadership position or position of responsibility or influence over others. I think I know well what my strengths and weaknesses are and how I respond to severe and extreme, both physical and mental stresses, and also how to kind of control and recognize behaviors or specific behaviours so to reduce any negative impact and maintain a positive influence even if we're in very challenging times. Secondly, I think it's important to understand others. You really have to know your team. We have to value every individual and understand who they are, what motivates them and what they value, and be empathetic towards that. It's also important to understand every individual's strengths and weaknesses, and that helps you sort of effectively manage and lead a team, because delegation will be key, and work should be delegated to an individual based on their strengths, which will allow them to make a valued contribution and for a team to work as effectively as possible. That's not to say we don't need to recognise weaknesses and shore up those weaknesses, whether that's through extra training or by support. It's just trying to work to sort of more natural strengths where possible. And lastly, it's lead by example. And I always sort of feel nervous when I make this statement, because it's often really left explained and can be very empty rhetoric. But in simple terms, what I mean is be a role model, live the values that you expect others to uphold, communicate your values constantly, and it's most effective if you can demonstrate them. And that really does generate integrity and trust and loyalty. So this is a photo of me and my team in Afghanistan in summer of 2012. It's the smallest team that I've had the privilege to command. And this was our first day on the ground. We're a Royal Engineer search team, and our job was to identify the threats posed by explosive hazards, so primarily improvised explosive devices. And many of which were victim operated, and I needed to understand how they would be employed against us, against our Afghan partners, and even against civilians. So our mission was to search, find and destroy these devices to give ourselves and our Afghan partners an advantage over the Taliban. But ultimately it was to save lives. These devices are indiscriminate and have unfortunately killed and maimed many civilians and soldiers alike. So my role to understand the threat, to work with our partners, devise a plan, and then remove these threats with my team. So effective communication throughout is very paramount. Our team was formed a little bit over a month from when this photo was taken, and I became responsible for every aspect of their lives, from their career management, training development, through to their actual life. But they were also responsible for keeping me safe in my life. And there's a saying in the military which is train hard to fight easy, and that's what we did. We each had very specific roles and responsibilities, and these needed to be demonstrated and understood by each person within the team. And while that was the case, we also need contingency with the team, and I wanted the team to feel empowered that they could do the right thing, particularly if we found ourselves in a very challenging situation. So in our training, we would push each other and challenge each other. So our tour of Afghanistan lasted 6 months and 3 weeks, so it was a marathon, not a sprint. And once we started operating in Afghanistan, we were a very slick team. That's not to say things didn't go wrong, but after every task, we would take the time for a debrief and reflect collectively what worked, what didn't, how we could improve. And I'd also make sure that we could celebrate our successes and what the positives were, and it can be really challenging during more difficult times to identify those. It was also my responsibility to ensure that we looked after ourselves, that we rested in between our tasks and had the opportunity to sort of do things like exercise or play games, speak to friends and family, to keep up our morale. It's often thought that rest and doing something that you enjoy is a treat or a nice to have, or something that you have to really earn, and you can only do it when you're not busy. But in actual fact, it's probably something that does need to be prioritized, because it is critical to anyone's sort of healthy function, and for the most part those are activities that make us who we are and are most important to us. And lastly, there are several things that influence a team's success, but I think the most important is trust. Trust is the glue that holds us together, and it's the belief that anyone can have, or the confidence that one can have in the reliability, integrity and honesty of another. Trust is a really difficult topic to describe. It's something that's never blindly given. It's not always something that has to be earned. And trust is built through honest and open, transparent communication. And building trust creates safety. And safety allows people to be willing to take risks, to speak their minds, to apply sort of more creativity and stick up for what they know to be true and right. So things don't always go to plan in people's careers, and actually halfway through my Afghan tour, I found my job changed, and I now had to lead senior Afghan commanders on how they could counter the threat from improvised explosive devices. I got the job because I was the most qualified person for the role, and it was a surprise for both the Brits and the Afghans to have a woman in this role. And I do think there were concerns as to how I would fare working with the Afghans, who culturally do not have women in senior positions. But I earned their respect through open dialogue, certainly treated them with the utmost respect. I had witnessed Brits and Americans behaving in a manner that I would term as derogatory and patronising, sometimes even aggressive, and wanting to impose our way without necessarily understanding the specific challenges that the Afghan commanders face. So we really did form a strong team and work together to overcome the challenges. Since those days in Afghanistan, I have been travelling and delivering training to forces predominantly combating Islamist terrorist groups for some years. As one might imagine, working in the Middle East, Africa and Afghanistan with both the army and as a consultant leads to very different perspectives on what works and what doesn't when it comes to managing and leading people. And leading is situational, and in all situations you have to be adaptive. For example, in Nigeria, which are the pictures on the slide here, I developed and delivered the first counter-ID training course for Nigerian army engineers. They didn't have any capability, and they were sustaining high casualties from Boko Haram and the insurgency in the northeast of the country. And the soldiers described being posted to the northeast as a death sentence. So they'd really lost confidence. They were poorly paid and worked in really challenging conditions and with limited resources. So spending time getting to know them was really important to their training. Not only was it an immensely rewarding experience for me, and conducting training with them provided me a means of breaking down those barriers, and often by example, explaining and demonstrating what good looked like and that it was attainable. And so in this situation, we needed to prove to them that they could be safe with their limited resources. And I think what was most important was not just equipping them with a new skill set, but also inspiring confidence. And so the lesson to take from this is that training is important in every walk of life, and in particular in academia. And we can build confidence through sort of tough, imaginative, interesting and progressive training. And key to successful leadership of any team is just upholding those shared values and standards. So I've highlighted some of my lessons learned from sort of my leadership in practice. So now for some of the theory. So in the 1960s, John Adair introduced this model to the army, and it's a really simple yet effective framework, and it shows 3 factors of any leadership situation: the task, the team, and the individual. And it's important to note that the fundamental principles of leadership do not change, whether we're in peacetime, war fighting, normal jogging, COVID-19, whatever the situation, they don't change. And the army has recently adapted context to be included in this model. We really must understand the current situation and appreciate the impact that it has on individuals and on a team. For example, we are all currently impacted by COVID-19, and a leader needs to understand the complexity of that and make sense of it. But as with any Venn diagram, it demonstrates the factors are interdependent, and there is a sweet spot, certainly a balance that needs to be worked towards. But we can't be there all the time, and sometimes leaders will need to recognise and compensate accordingly for when too much time or effort, resource, emotion has been allocated to another section. Often the task is what will take precedence. But over the next few slides, I'll discuss this model in the context of a crisis. However, as I've explained, the fundamental principles remain the same and true for when everything is smooth sailing. And in fact, they're just as important in the good times as they are in the hard times. So, firstly, the task. Leaders must define and communicate clear purpose. This sets out what needs to be achieved, particularly important during a crisis as our priorities will have changed. It can be challenging in an academic context as we often work independently, even if we're in collaborations, but we should work together to support one another, and so that tasks are collective and there is shared ownership. In a crisis, we also have to plan, and this is very intuitive to me. I've been taught a robust estimate process that helps me assess what I need to do and why, identify possible solutions, risks, allocate resources, etc. And how to select a best solution. And it can be sort of our normal way of working would be to try to do this on our own. However, it's much more helpful to actually share a problem. It can be counterproductive not to, and it's better to draw on insights of the people around you and your team. And a simple plan developed as a group will underpin success. You have to make informed decisions and calculated risks, but another army saying is that no plan survives contact with the enemy. So expect the plan at points perhaps to fail, but just be prepared to adapt. Lastly, it's important to keep long-term goals in sight. It's very easy to be in the here and now, and certainly at the start of a pandemic that may be very justified. However, we must find the time to assess not just the short-term objectives, but how they fit in with the longer term. So, the team. As in any situation, a crisis demands teamwork, and we want empowered teams. So when there's so much uncertainty, timely and honest communication ensures a shared understanding, especially if there's a quicker pace of change and we need to keep up. I'm sure many of you at the moment could perhaps reflect on how well your supervisors and institutions have been doing this. And we could all agree that if they were effective, it will aid our understanding and inform our own decision-making processes, allow us to make priorities and allocate our resources accordingly. It's also worth remembering, though, that communication can be in all directions, up, down, up, and side to side. So actually, if you do feel that you are not in a position where you are being effectively communicated to, that you can also ask. As a leader, you must be actively listening, and you should encourage diversity of thought and be open to being challenged. And the challenge culture is really important because it aids decision making and ethical decision making. It's just not possible, given the complexity of sort of who we are in the situation, just as people, that and the differences that between us, to make sound decisions without engaging everybody and have broad representation. And included in that is learning. In a crisis, both success and failure are inevitable, and what matters most is that we learn, harnessing those good aspects, adapting from the bad and sharing best practice. And so next, it's the individual, because above all, leadership is always about people. And crisis certainly invokes extremes of experiences, emotions, and behaviours. So as a leader, your role is to value each member of the team and guide and support them. But also, and when I say as a leader, and as I introduced at the beginning, I mean in the broadest sense, just your role as a team member is to guide and support each other. And this is normally challenging, but in the current crisis, even more so. We're now geographically dislocated, we're juggling different tasks, we have Zoom fatigue. What do we prioritize? When do we prioritize it? How do we help people when we don't necessarily ask for help when we need it? And people also will respond differently to different pressures. So this is why it's really important to get to know everyone well in a team, so we can identify changes in their usual behaviour. And often people are very private, but taking the time to get to know them will certainly open the door to having more difficult conversations should we need to. And if somebody really is struggling, if you can pick up on the early signs, sort of later, larger issues may be avoided. And to assist, you can lead by example and prioritise your own self-care. And I appreciate that this can be quite difficult at times, but it is very important that you take those breaks and rest so that you are able to make practical and pragmatic decisions. And so, sorry, my screen just came up. I haven't discussed any leadership theories and models, and I've purposely stayed away from personality traits of effective leaders, as I don't think these are particularly helpful and are inherently biased. But I would like to introduce one theory, and that is collaborative leadership. So this recognises, in the way that I was just discussing with John Adair's model, that leadership is situational. But I feel that this is the model that is most suitable for the 21st century and for academia. So the traditional view of leadership in the simplest sense is that it involves a leader, those that are being led, a situation, and a particular task that must be accomplished. And the leader is the most important person in this. The leader influences others by providing purpose and direction and motivation, and they have the responsibility to accomplish the task and implement any changes that are necessary to do so. However, this is a very outdated model. Effective leadership model today requires a much more shared leadership approach, where leaders leverage and operate within teams and teams of teams to accomplish tasks. And this is vital because no individual leader today can possess any of the necessary knowledge and skills to succeed in the challenging environments that we currently live and work in. And I'm sure many of you can draw upon your own research and sort of educational examples where you know that you actually have a skill that perhaps your supervisors do not, and you could find yourself very easily leading an element of your work. So this model, collaborative leadership, has much in common with both servant leadership, which is putting others above yourself, and transformational leadership, which is developing others to get the best out of them. And it starts with the premise that if you bring the appropriate people together in constructive ways with good information sharing, they can create a vision and strategy to address the shared concerns of an organisation or community and start solving problems. So the first tenet is silo busting. Silo mentality is synonymous with power struggles, lack of cooperation, loss of productivity, and it can cause organizations or teams to misallocate resources, send inconsistent messaging, fail to leverage on opportunities. And it's necessary for leaders to really eliminate any of those turf issues and to help people find common ground and work together in a collaborative environment. Teams are encouraged to do so, and they'll share information, share resources, share knowledge, share their time and share their efforts. These aren't in any particular order. So another tenet is building trust. And as we've already discussed, trust is the glue that holds everyone together. Next, there's need to promote learning, and a collaborative environment is one that's nurturing and offers opportunity to share knowledge and experience amongst each other, as well as educating members along the way on an ongoing basis. And lastly, to promote diversity. Research has shown that diverse groups are much more effective at problem solving than homogenous groups, and policies that promote diversity and inclusion will enhance our ability to draw from the broadest possible pool of talent and solve some of our toughest challenges. And so there's something that we should most definitely be striving towards. So hopefully I have shown, just through sharing my story with you and the ARMY model and what collaborative leadership is about, that leadership development is important. And it's not just for those informal leadership positions. Our behaviours have impacts, and therefore it's important to understand the fundamental principles of good leadership. There are a plethora of things that we can do to improve our working environment, and these points that I raise here are perhaps a good place to start. Just trying to understand ourselves and others, have integrity and moral courage, and that's just to speak up for what is true and right, and just take responsibility for what is very much in the sphere of in your sphere of influence. Many of us will have leadership experiences, whether it's teaching, leading roles within a sports team or society, and you may feel that you're in a very early stage of your career, but all that is important is that you take the time to reflect, consider what you've learned and how you can improve, and that is very much leadership. I'm sure I understand that many of you will be about to embark on new challenges, whether that's inside or outside of academia, and you'll often find that you'll be referred to as future leaders. And leadership skills are definitely key to success and that of the people around you. Sometimes the concepts can seem very unyielding and overwhelming, particularly if they're new to you, but do not doubt yourselves, because you are already leaders. We already have influence over others, and we understand what our values are, and our behaviours can be used to uphold them. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and I now welcome all of your questions and hopefully discussion. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Nadia. That was really interesting. Truly, I find it really interesting to be linking the context of the army and academia together. It was lovely. Thank you. If anyone's got any questions, you're more than welcome to type them in the chat room or chat box, or you can also just unmute yourselves and ask the questions, or if you'd prefer that. I guess what came or what initially came to me was that you were kind of focusing a lot on these parts of like building the team and preparing for different tasks that the team is meant to basically carry out. What if there is conflict within the team? Do you have any thoughts or opinions on that? So obviously this kind of groundwork is important in order to avoid that, but what if it gets to that stage where there is, say, a lack of trust or something similar? How to kind of how about like conflict resolution within teams?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a very good question. I think firstly, conflict within a team is inevitable. There will always be situations perhaps where people do not feel comfortable. I think the first thing, if you are in a position of formal leadership is that you allow a challenge culture so that people feel that they can raise an issue direct to you. If you find that you or yourself are perhaps a more junior member of the team, and that challenge culture doesn't exist, I think it's very important to be able to identify outside of your team how you can raise the issues in a professional manner. I'm thinking, I understand most people are master's students and PhD students here, aren't we? So it can be very challenging in our own situation, but you should never feel that you're on your own, and there should always be another path to raise issues, and do so in a manner that is productive. So this is the issue, this is the effect that it's having, these are the solutions that I propose. Is there a way in which we can implement it? If it's really severe, it's of course going outside of your sort of hierarchy will be very important. If it isn't, and actually just having the courage to speak up, I think you'll find that a lot of supervisors will actually respect that and listen to concerns. Yeah, conflict resolution is a really important part of teamwork. The first part, hopefully that we all are in cultures that allow us to question it. If we're not, try and find ways in which we can either instigate that culture, so by raising it in a professional manner, and if it's so severe that that isn't possible, I think you have to be strong and look for the way to do it outside of your hierarchy.
Yeah, very, very good thoughts. Thanks for that. That's really good. Yeah, I guess in that, ultimately, in a situation where conflict might have arisen already, it's important to kind of continue that trust building, and so there's been a lack of some part of the team building, or the some part is lacking, I guess, to try and focus on that as well, and kind of try and harbor this kind of a culture where things are raised openly and effectively. So we have a question from Lena, who thanks you for the talk, and she asks you, how was transformation from military life into civilian life?
Quite challenging, I would say, quite challenging. I think firstly, military life is just it's very all-encompassing. It's very much more a lifestyle rather than a career. You live and work in the same place, and it can be at times very intense. But also, everyone in the military has been through very specific training. So everybody that you work with, we've all got very shared experiences. Even if we experience them at different times, we've all got very shared experiences. So we will have a shared values system, and I think that element makes it really difficult when you enter the civilian world and suddenly not everyone speaks the same way as you, not everybody understands your own my experiences in the same way. People have a lot of misconceptions about the military and what it means, or what that means about me, and make judgments. And so I think, to begin with, quite challenging, but actually over time, I've found that there are perhaps some very important lessons that I've learned in the military, and that's how I'm finding my way through academia at the moment, is by sharing sort of the leadership development element to try and improve the research culture and the culture in which we are currently working in. And I feel that's given me a platform perhaps to sort of myth bust a little bit. But yes, challenging to begin with, just because of those shared values. And I think if we more start speaking about what our values are and what's important, then perhaps we're not too dissimilar.
Brilliant. Yeah, definitely. I can imagine it is a massive change in your lifestyle, essentially.
Yeah.
So this all encapsulating career that really just, I can imagine it really just is your life at that moment
Yeah.
when you're in the field and when you're in training.
Yeah.
Yeah. So would you say was he hard or easy? So in saying that, when we're talking about this, like this, it is essentially your life. It's a lifestyle rather than just. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah.
I think it's my internet at times that's cutting off as well, to be honest. Yeah. So I was wondering how easy it is to, or was it to kind of keep in touch with people outside of your army life during the time when you're working on that career, basically?
I think it's really difficult to. A lot of your time you don't own yourself, and so you will miss out on things with friends. You move a lot, so you're often not based in the same area. Move every 2 years, and to places of the country or abroad that, you know, of course, friends are not near to. And I think people who are outside of the military, of course, don't understand that, and their lives move on, and you become not part of that. And I think most of us would describe the first couple of years still having loads of invitations to do things with civilian friends, and after a few years they definitely drop off. And the military way is that you do spend very intense periods of time with certain people, and then you'll get separated, but you will always still meet up with each other, understanding that it's not by design that we haven't seen each other or maintained our relationship. So you can just pick up, but I don't think everybody appreciates that it can be just very difficult to maintain relationships, and you don't have the same freedoms to do so, and you can't just travel up and down the country or across the world all the time to see people on a Saturday night whim. Everything has to be planned, and so yeah, maintaining relationships is quite challenging, and I don't think everybody understands that challenge, and perhaps aren't generous towards us. But then I do sort of think more philosophically that friends will always sort of move in and out of your life, and I think if you are good friends and you have shared experiences, you will probably be able to pick up again where you leave off.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the bonds that you form in the army are kind of, I would imagine that they tend to be quite strong afterwards, as you spend a lot of time with certain people, and in potentially very tough circumstances as well. So 100%. I was wondering, anybody else, any questions in the audience? Not any typed ones anyway. Just feel free to type anything at all in the chat, or unmute yourselves as well. I guess I'm curious, personally, what is it that you're working on at the moment then?
So my PhD is focused on preclinical systematic reviews, so systematic reviews of animal studies, and trying to improve the feasibility of those, because they're a really important way of compiling and of all the evidence. But there's so many animal studies, and so we need to improve the feasibility of doing those. So I'm looking at technological solutions for that. But the context in which I'm doing this in is answering questions related to pain neurobiology. So at the moment, I'm doing a really large systematic review of all cannabis-based medicines, or endocannabinoid system modulators, or cannabis itself, how those have been tested in animal models of pain, and see if we can compare that to the clinical situation. It's part of the International Association for the Study of Pain Presidential Task Force, which was set up nearly 2 years ago to assess all the cannabis literature and evidence, because, as many of you will be aware, cannabis is being legalized around the world for recreational use as well as medicinal use, and one of the key areas is pain management, but we don't have a handle of that evidence base, and there is a lot of conflicting information as to whether it's effective or not and what the harms are. So we are trying to assess it all in the most rigorous and comprehensive manner so that we can inform a future research agenda. So that's sort of what my work is currently focused on. And then on the side, I'm doing the leadership development element. In academia particularly, there is very little focus on developing leadership skills. And of course, to me, they are fundamental. And I think that everybody should be made aware of sort of leadership, what it is, and what is good, what is bad, and understand their own progression and development from the earliest possible career stage. And it's something that you will just return to those fundamental principles and understand them given a new context or situation that you find yourself in. So those are sort of my 2 prongs to what I do now.
Oh, brilliant. That's really interesting. It's nice to hear the kind of academic leadership in like practice and how that translates into your like current work as well. So, yeah, that sounds really interesting. We actually have one more question from the audience. So there's, based on your experience, how people outside of military who never served, how they how is their understanding, how they understand or help to returning military personnel could be improved. Sorry, hold on. How their understanding or help to returning military personnel could be improved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think
so do. People who never served. So yeah, so people who never served in the army. Yeah. How their understand. Yeah. So how could their understanding or help be improved, basically?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that the things that sort of set us apart are quite challenging to communicate, and often they're quite personal and quite private. So often the questions that you get asked perhaps sort of hit a raw nerve as opposed to being the most sympathetic or well thought through. I didn't ever really speak about my military experiences to begin with when I first returned to academia, because I felt that people have a lot of misconceived ideas, and in part that was on me, because actually that may be totally unfounded. It's just that people don't know and don't have experience, so they can't possibly know. So it's really just up to us, I think, to speak more and speak more openly. I think in recent years the media has done a lot to help improve, particularly in the UK, the position of the military and how military personnel are viewed. But I would also say on the flip side is that everyone is different, and so we should, everyone will come with their own personalities, their own challenges. They're from very broad backgrounds as well. So we are just a reflection of society as a whole. And I think the main thing is just being on both sides, just being open and having open conversations about what their needs are. I'm very fortunate. I left the military having had very positive experiences. I was never injured, and certainly not in in any life-changing way. So for me, transitioning into sort of civilian life is very easy and straightforward. Even though I describe it as challenging, I'm just talking about that almost in a cultural setting, but actually I can still do and be successful and fit in. I think for those people that perhaps leave the military with far more challenging circumstances, whether that's through injury, with mental health issues, that's very different, and of course they'll need to be supported in different ways. But the first step of that is just talking and understanding what people need, and that's no different and should be no different to anybody else that joins any new team. I hope that answers the question.
Sounds good. You were cutting there for me a little bit. to be honest,
Oh no.
at least for myself. But yeah, towards the end of it. But I think I personally caught the most of it. I'm not sure again if it's my connection or but yes. Any more questions? If not, I think we can start wrapping up, and there's going to be a next talk starting soon, I believe, which would be about cognitive science. I believe it's called Coralie Chevalier from France. Actually.
If it's
but thank you very much.
That's
yes.
okay. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. And I'm very willing to continue the conversation should anyone want to or want to talk about their own personal leadership development. I'm very happy to chat.
Absolutely. Anybody, you're more than willing to make Nadia a co-host. So this talk will keep running basically with Nadia as the co-host as well after I'm gonna have to leave. So everybody's more than welcome to stay and chat and share experiences. Yeah, that's great. I think Lena, your comments are sent to me privately, but basically, yeah. So she was commenting on your talk as well. She was the one asking those questions earlier, and said that she asked the question based on working with veterans, and she found that it is difficult to communicate between or get help needs. So, and she's saying that she's glad that your experience was positive, basically. So, yeah, very nice, and good questions as well. From that, yeah. But yeah, thank you very much, Nadia, from my part as well.
No, thank you.
It was a really interesting talk. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to. People are asking whether recordings will be shared widely.